The Legend of King Arthur, the Rise of a Kingdom, and the Birth of a Legend. Chapter 1. The Treacherous King, and the Boy Who Would Be King. In the ancient realm of Britain, darkness had fallen upon the land. A usurper named Vortigern sat upon the throne that was not rightfully his, having seized power through betrayal and blood. He had murdered the rightful king and now lived in constant fear, knowing that the king's sons, Ambrosius and Uther, would one day return to claim vengeance. And that day came sooner than he feared. A messenger burst into Vortigern's hall, breathless and terrified. "My lord, the enemy approaches. Ambrosius and Uther march upon us with 20,000 men. They've sworn a great oath to slay you before this year ends." Vortigern's face went deathly pale. In his panic, he summoned every builder and craftsman in the kingdom. "Go to the furthest west of my lands," he commanded, his voice shaking with fear and rage. "Build me the strongest castle ever known, and you have 100 days to complete it, or I'll spare none of your lives." The workers found a suitable site and began immediately, but something strange happened. Every night, the walls they'd built during the day would mysteriously collapse. No matter how hard they worked, no matter how carefully they laid each stone, the same thing kept happening. The walls would rise then fall, rise then fall. Terrified for their lives, the workers threw themselves before the king. "We cannot complete this task. Some unseen force destroys our work each night." Desperate, Vortigern called upon his wizards and astrologers. They performed their dark rituals and declared, "Only one thing can make this castle stand. You must find a youth born without a mortal father. His blood, mixed into the foundation stones, will give the castle the power to remain standing." Messengers spread throughout the kingdom searching for such a child. In a small village, they heard boys fighting, and one group shouted at a boy, "Get away from us, demon child! Son of no mortal man! Go find your father and leave us alone." The messengers seized the boy and brought him before the king. His name was Merlin. When Merlin stood before Vortigern, he didn't cower in fear. Instead, he spoke boldly. "Why have you dragged me here? My magicians say I must sprinkle my castle with the blood of one born without a human father." Vortigern replied. Merlin's eyes flashed. "Your magicians are liars. Bring them before me, and I will prove it." Astonished, the king summoned his wizards. Merlin turned to them with fierce intelligence burning in his young eyes. "You claim my blood will make the castle stand, because you don't know the real reason it falls. Tell me what lies beneath this ground." The wizards remained silent, unable to answer. "I'll tell you what you should have known," Merlin continued. "Order your workers to dig deep beneath the foundation. They will find a great underground pool." The king commanded it done, and just as Merlin predicted, they discovered a vast pool of water hidden beneath the earth. Merlin turned again to the humiliated wizards. "Now tell me what lies beneath that pool." Again, they had no answer. "Drain the pool," Merlin instructed the king. "And at the bottom you will find two dragons, one white, one red, locked in eternal combat. Each night they wake and battle, and their struggle shakes the earth and topples your towers." The workers drained the pool, and there, just as Merlin had foretold, lay two enormous dragons, sleeping but clearly real. Vortigern waited through the day and into the night to see what would happen. As darkness fell, the dragons stirred. The white dragon and the red dragon rose and faced each other, breathing fire, clashing with tremendous force. The white dragon seemed stronger, driving the red dragon back again and again. But the red dragon fought valiantly, refusing to surrender. The battle raged 4 hours, until finally the red dragon was defeated. and the white dragon vanished into the darkness. "What does this mean?" Vortigern demanded. Merlin's face grew grave, and tears filled his eyes as he spoke his first great prophecy. "Woe to the red dragon, for he represents the British people. The white dragon is the Saxon invader whom you, O king, have foolishly welcomed to these shores. The Saxons will conquer much of this land, and cities will burn, and people will suffer greatly. But hear me well, a time will come when the oppressed shall rise again. A great boar of Cornwall shall emerge and drive out the invaders. He shall rule this island and command respect across the seas. His power will extend even into the forests of Gaul. The whole world will speak his name, and his deeds will never be forgotten. He shall be immortal in the mouths of the people. But as for you, Vortigern, flee now from the sons of Constantine. They come to burn you in your tower for your treachery. You murdered their father and brought the Saxon heathens to defile this land. Ambrosius and Eutha are upon you even now, seeking revenge. Find refuge if you can, let know that none may escape the judgment of God." Thus did young Merlin foretell the coming of King Arthur. Vortigern, convicted of his sins and terrified by the prophecy, said nothing. He fled to his tower and locked himself inside. Soon after, Ambrosius arrived with his army. He surrounded the tower and cried out to his knights, "Avenge the murder of my father and the ruin of Britain." When his forces couldn't breach the walls, Ambrosius ordered his men to set the tower ablaze. The fire spread quickly, growing into a massive inferno that consumed the entire structure. Vortigern died in the flames, just as Merlin had predicted. Ambrosius then turned his might against the Saxon invaders, defeating them in many battles and bringing peace to the land for a time. He restored ruined churches and brought order back to the kingdom. One day, visiting the monastery near Salisbury, Ambrosius came upon the burial ground of British knights who had been treacherously murdered by the Saxons during what was supposed to be a peace conference. Nearly 500 noble warriors lay dead there, victims of Saxon treachery. Deeply moved, Ambrosius wanted to build a worthy monument to honor these martyrs. He consulted many craftsmen and builders, but none could suggest anything grand enough. Finally, on the advice of the Archbishop, he sent for Merlin. "If you would honor these fallen heroes with an everlasting monument," Merlin said, "send for the Giant's Dance, which stands on Mount Killerhouse in Ireland. It is a structure of stones so massive and mysterious that none in this age could raise them without perfect knowledge of ancient arts. If those stones could be brought here and arranged as they stand in Ireland, they would stand forever." Ambrosius laughed. "How could we possibly move such enormous stones from so great a distance? Surely Britain has stones enough for any monument." "Do not laugh, my lord," Merlin replied seriously. "Those stones are mystical and possess healing powers. The giants of old brought them from the furthest coast of Africa and placed them in Ireland. They designed them as healing baths. When the stones were washed and the sick placed in the water, they were cured. Every stone carries the same virtue still." Convinced by Merlin's words, the Britons decided to claim the stones. Eutha, the king's brother, led 15,000 men across the sea to Ireland. King Gelomanius of Ireland resisted fiercely, but after a great battle, the Britons reached the Giant's Dance. Yet when they tried to move the massive stones, the strength of the entire army proved useless. The stones wouldn't budge. Then Merlin stepped forward. While the soldiers watched in amazement, he used his knowledge and mysterious arts to construct ingenious machines. What had seemed impossible became simple under his guidance. The great stones were carefully lowered and loaded onto ships. When they reached Salisbury, King Ambrosius, wearing his crown, held a magnificent 4-day feast of Pentecost. With all the clergy and people watching, Merlin raised the stones and arranged them in a perfect circle around the burial ground, exactly as they had stood in the mountains of Ireland. The monument was called Stonehenge, and it stands upon Salisbury Plain to this very day. Not long after, Ambrosius was poisoned by Saxon assassins and died. He was buried within the Giant's Dance, joining the heroes he had honored. At the moment of his death, a spectacular comet appeared in the sky, a star of amazing size and brightness with a beam of light extending from it. At the end of the beam was a shape like a dragon, and from the dragon's mouth extended two rays, one stretching toward Gaul, the other dividing into 7 smaller rays over the Irish Sea. When Uther saw this omen, while marching against enemies in Wales, he was deeply troubled about what it might mean. He sent for Merlin, who cried out with a loud voice, "O mighty loss! Britain is struck a terrible blow. Ambrosius is dead, your brother, our great prince. Without him we are vulnerable, unless God helps us. But press forward, Uther, and destroy your enemies. Victory shall be yours, and you shall be king of all Britain, for that star with the fiery dragon represents you. The ray over Gaul means you shall have a son so mighty, that all those kingdoms shall obey him. He will be the greatest king this world has ever known." Thus, for the second time, Merlin prophesied the coming of Arthur. When Uther became king, he remembered Merlin's vision. He had 2 golden dragons crafted in the image of the comet dragon. One he gave to Winchester Cathedral, the other was carried before him in all his wars. From that day forward, he was known as Uther Pendragon, Uther, the dragon's head. King Uther brought order to all the land, even sailing to Scotland and taming the fierce rebel peoples there. When he returned to London, he held a great Easter feast. Among the nobles who attended was Gorloy, Duke of Cornwall, who came with his wife Igerna, the most beautiful woman in all of Britain. Shortly after, Duke Gorloy was killed in battle. Uther, who had fallen deeply in love with Igerna, wanted to marry her, but she was locked away in the impregnable castle of Tintagel on the furthest coast of Cornwall. The king sent for Merlin to help him. Merlin agreed, but on one condition: the first son born of this marriage must be given to me. For I know through my arts that this child will be the long-awaited prince, the future King Arthur himself. Uther agreed without hesitation. When the child was born, Merlin came to the castle. "You must now make arrangements for your son's upbringing," he told the king. "Do as you think best," Uther replied. "I know a lord in this land who is both true and faithful," Merlin said. "His name is Sir Ector. He has fine lands in both England and Wales. When the child is born, deliver him to me at the postern gate, unchristened. I will take him to Sir Ector, who will raise him as his own son." And so it was done. When the baby was born, he was secretly handed to Merlin, who took him to a holy priest. The child was christened with the name Arthur, then taken to Sir Ector's castle. There Arthur was nursed by Sir Ector's own wife and raised alongside Sir Ector's son, Kay. For many years, Arthur lived there in secret. Only Merlin and the king knew who he truly was or where he could be found. But King Uther fell gravely ill, and the Saxons, seeing their chance, invaded once more. Though weak and barely able to move, Uther refused to die in bed while his kingdom burned. He ordered a litter made so he could be carried into battle. When the Saxons heard the dying king was coming in a litter, they mocked him. "Why should we fear a half-dead man?" They laughed, and left their city gates wide open in contempt. But Uther's forces stormed the city, catching the Saxons off guard. The battle raged fiercely, and though the enemy fought back desperately, their leaders Octa and Eosa were slain. The Saxons fled in terror. The king, though he could barely sit upright before the battle, now sat up in his litter unaided, his face bright with joy. "They called me the half-dead king," he said, laughing, "and so I was. But victory, while half-dead, is better than the best health in defeat. To die with honor is far better than to live in shame." But the Saxons weren't finished. Though defeated, they plotted treachery. Learning that Eutha drank daily from a certain spring, they poisoned it. The next day, the king drank from the spring and was seized with the pains of death. 100 others who drank after him also died before the villainy was discovered. As Eutha lay dying, unable to speak, the nobles gathered around him in desperation. Merlin came to his bedside, and all the barons assembled to witness what would happen next. Merlin spoke clearly, so all could hear. "Lord Eutha, shall your son Arthur be king of all this realm after your days?" With tremendous effort, Eutha turned his head and spoke his final words in the hearing of all. "God's blessing and mine be upon him. I command him to pray for my soul, and to claim my crown or forfeit all my blessing." With those words, King Eutha Pendragon died. The bishops, clergy, and great multitudes of people mourned him. They carried his body to the convent of Ambrius and buried him next to his brother's grave, within the giant's dance within Stonehenge itself. And so the stage was set for the greatest king Britain would ever know. But Arthur remained hidden, raised as a simple knight's son, unaware of his true destiny. The kingdom fell into chaos, with many lords fighting over the crown. The time was coming when only a miracle could reveal the true king. That miracle was about to arrive. The Legend of King Arthur, Chapter 2. The Sword in the Stone. Young Arthur had grown into a tall, strong, and noble youth of 15 years. He excelled in all the exercises proper for a knight's training, yet he remained gentle in manner and humble in spirit. He had no idea that he was the son of a king, that royal blood flowed through his veins. When King Eutha died calling for his son Arthur to take the throne, many nobles were confused and suspicious. "Who is this Arthur?" they demanded. "We've never heard of him." Some doubted he even existed, believing Merlin had tricked the dying king. Others resented the idea of an unknown boy ruling over them. With no clear heir, the great lords returned to their lands and gathered armies. Each one believed he should be king. The land fell into chaos, every lord seeking his own advantage, every baron fighting for power. The Saxons, seeing Britain weak and divided, grew bolder and ravaged the towns and villages. Merlin went to Bryce, the Archbishop of Canterbury, with a plan. Summon all the earls, barons, and knights of the realm to London before Christmas, he advised. Command them to come under pain of excommunication. Tell them they will learn God's will about who should be their rightful king. The Archbishop did as Merlin suggested. On Christmas Eve, all the greatest lords and princes gathered in London. Long before dawn, they filled St. Paul's Church, praying for guidance. They begged heaven to show them who should wear the crown. As they prayed, something miraculous appeared in the churchyard. A massive square stone stood directly before the church doors, a stone that hadn't been there before. Driven deep into the center of this stone was a beautiful sword, its blade buried to the hilt, and on the sword, written in letters of gold, were these words: "Whoever pulls this sword from this stone is the rightful king of Britain." The people rushed from the church in wonder. When Mass ended, the nobles, knights, and princes crowded around the stone, marveling at the sword. A law was quickly made. Whoever could pull the sword free would be immediately acknowledged as king. One by one, the greatest lords of the realm tried. Knights famous for their strength pulled until their muscles strained. Powerful barons heaved with all their might, but the sword wouldn't move not even a fraction of an inch. When everyone had failed, the archbishop spoke. The man heaven has chosen is not yet here, but God will doubtless make him known before many days pass. To guard the sword, 10 knights of high renown were chosen to stand watch day and night. A proclamation went throughout the land. Anyone who wished could come and try to pull the sword from the stone. Days passed, countless men tried and failed. Then came New Year's Eve, and a great tournament was announced in London. The Archbishop had organized it to keep the lords and common people together during these uncertain times. Among those attending was Sir Ector, Arthur's foster father, who held lands near London. With him came his son Kay, recently made a knight, ready to compete in his first tournament. And young Arthur came too, to watch the spectacle and serve his brother. As they rode toward the tournament grounds, Sir Kay suddenly discovered he'd forgotten his sword. He'd left it at their lodging. "Arthur," he said, "please ride back and fetch my sword for me. I can't compete without it." "Gladly," Arthur replied, and immediately turned his horse back toward their lodging. But when Arthur reached the house, he found it locked and empty. Everyone had already left for the tournament. Standing outside the locked door, Arthur felt frustrated. His brother needed a sword, and he'd failed to bring it. Then an idea struck him. "I saw a sword stuck in a stone in the churchyard," he thought. "My brother should not go without a sword today. I'll take that one for him." He rode quickly to St. Paul's churchyard. The 10 guardian knights had all gone to watch the tournament, so the sword stood unattended. Arthur dismounted, tied his horse to the gate, and walked directly to the stone. He grasped the sword's handle firmly. Without effort, without struggle, the blade slid smoothly from the stone, if it had been waiting for his hand all along. Arthur had no idea what he'd just done. He simply mounted his horse and rode back to deliver the sword to Kay. Sir Kay recognized the sword immediately. His eyes went wide. He rode straight to his father and held it up. "Father, look, I have the sword from the stone. This means I must be king of all this land." Sir Ector looked at the sword, then at his son. His face grew serious. Without a word, he turned his horse and headed for the churchyard, with both Kay and Arthur following. At the church, they all dismounted and went inside. Sir Ector placed his hand on the holy altar and turned to Kay. "Now, my son, tell me truly, how did you get this sword?" Kay hesitated, then lowered his eyes. "My brother Arthur brought it to me." Sir Ector turned to Arthur, his expression grave. "How did you come by this sword?" "Sir," Arthur said honestly, "when I went back to fetch Kay's sword, I found our lodging locked with everyone gone. I didn't want my brother to be without a sword, so I remembered seeing this one in the churchyard. I came here and pulled it from the stone. It came out quite easily. I meant no harm." Sir Ector stared at the young man he'd raised as his own son, his eyes filled with wonder and awe. "If this is truly what happened, then you shall be king of all this land. God has willed it. But let me see with my own eyes if you can place it back and draw it forth again." "That's no mystery," Arthur said, confused by all the fuss. He walked to the stone and slid the sword back into place. Sir Ector immediately grasped the handle and pulled with all his might. The sword didn't budge. Kay tried next, straining until sweat beaded on his forehead. Still the sword remained fixed. Then Arthur stepped forward, gripped the handle, and drew the sword out smoothly and easily. Sir Ector dropped to his knees before the boy he'd raised. Kay knelt beside his father. "Alas," Arthur cried out, confused and frightened. "My own dear father, my brother, why do you kneel to me?" "My lord Arthur," Sir Ector said gently, his voice thick with emotion, "I am not your father by blood, though I have loved you as my own son. I never knew how high your true lineage was." Then he explained how a stranger had brought Arthur to him as an infant with gold for his care, and how he'd raised Arthur without knowing who he really was. When Arthur understood, he threw his arms around Sir Ector and wept. "In one day I've lost my father, my mother, and my brother." "Arthur," Sir Ector said after a moment, "when you are made king, will you remember me and mine with kindness?" "If I were not grateful to you," Arthur replied earnestly, "I would be no true man's son. You are the person in all the world to whom I owe the most, and your wife, my foster mother, has cared for me as tenderly as if I were her own child. Whatever you ask of me, I will do. God forbid that I should fail you. I ask only this," Sir Ector said. "Make my son Kay your seneschal, your chief steward, and let him hold that office for all his life." "It shall be done," Arthur promised. "And never shall another hold that office while Kay and I both live." They went to the archbishop and told him everything. When the archbishop saw the sword in Arthur's hand, he set a day for all the princes, knights, and barons to gather once more at St. Paul's. When everyone assembled, the sword was placed back in the stone. Again, every lord and knight tried to pull it free. And again, every one of them failed except Arthur. But when the nobles saw a mere boy succeed where they had failed, many grew angry. "What?" they shouted. "Would you give this ancient kingdom to a boy born of unknown parentage? We know nothing of his lineage." Arguments erupted. The gathering dissolved into chaos. The archbishop, seeing the discord, postponed the decision until Candlemas, giving everyone time to calm down. At Candlemas, Arthur again pulled the sword free while everyone else failed. But still the barons protested and delayed, demanding the decision be put off until Easter. At Easter, the same thing happened. Finally, the archbishop, now certain of God's will, gathered a band of knights loyal to Arthur to protect him until Pentecost. He decreed that on that holy feast day, the matter would be settled once and for all. When Pentecost arrived and Arthur once more drew the sword, while all others failed, something changed. The common people, who had watched all these tests, suddenly raised their voices as one. "We will have Arthur for our king. We will have no more delay. God's will is clear, and we will kill anyone who stands against God's chosen king." The power of their united voice was overwhelming. Rich and poor, noble and common, all cried out together. They knelt as one and begged Arthur's forgiveness for doubting him so long. Moved by their devotion, Arthur pardoned them all with grace and kindness. Then he walked into the church and laid the sword upon the high altar, offering it to God. The greatest knight present knighted Arthur with full ceremony. The crown was placed upon his head. He swore solemn oaths to all the people, lords and commons alike, to be a true and just king all his life, to always deal justly, and to defend the weak. Every baron who held lands and castles did homage to him. Then King Arthur appointed his officials. Sir Kay became High Steward of England, Sir Baudwain of Britain became Constable, and Sir Orpheus became Chamberlain. With all his court and a great company of knights, Arthur travelled to the ancient city of Caerleon upon Usk to be crowned again in that historic place. But not everyone accepted him. The same lords who had delayed and denied him now came to Caerleon supposedly to pay homage, but actually plotting rebellion. They sat at Arthur's coronation feast, eating his food and drinking his wine, but hatred burned in their hearts. After the feast, following ancient royal custom, Arthur began distributing lands, titles, and gifts to his loyal followers. But before he could finish, the rebel lords rose up together and shouted their contempt. "We will take nothing from a beardless boy of low and unknown birth. Instead, we'll give you a gift: hard sword strokes between your neck and shoulders." The hall erupted into violence. Every man drew his weapon. But young King Arthur leapt forward like a flame, and his loyal knights rushed after him with swords flashing. A fierce battle raged through the hall until Arthur's forces drove the rebels out of the hall and out of the city entirely. The gates slammed shut behind them. In his fury and eagerness, Arthur had broken his sword, the sword from the stone, upon his enemies. Among the rebels were 6 powerful kings who burned with hatred for Arthur: King Lot, King Nantes, King Urience, King Carados, King Ida, and King Onguisant. These 6 combined their armies and laid siege to Caerleon itself. After 15 days, Merlin suddenly appeared in the rebels' camp. "What is the meaning of this treason?" he demanded. Then he told them the truth. Arthur was no low-born adventurer, but the son of King Uther Pendragon himself. Even without the miracle of the sword, they were bound by law and honor to serve him. Some of the kings, hearing this, were amazed and believed Merlin. But others, especially King Lot, mocked him. "You're nothing but a conjurer and wizard. Why should we believe your tricks?" Still, they agreed to let Arthur come out to speak with them. So Arthur rode forth to the city gate with the Archbishop, Merlin, Sir Kay, Sir Brastias, and a great company of supporters. Arthur didn't plead or bargain. He spoke to them as a king to his subjects, telling them plainly that he would make them all bow to him or die in the attempt unless they yielded immediately. The rebels departed in rage, both sides preparing for war. "What will you do?" Merlin asked the rebel kings. "You had best hold back, for even if you were 10 times as many, you would not prevail against Arthur. Shall we fear a dream reader?" King Lot sneered. With that, Merlin vanished and returned to Arthur's side. "I have need of a sword," Arthur told Merlin, "one that will teach these rebels a terrible lesson." "Come with me," Merlin replied. "There is such a sword, and I can help you gain it." They rode out that night until they came to a broad, beautiful lake. In the middle of the water, Arthur saw an arm clothed in shimmering white silk rising from the depths. The arm held a magnificent sword. "There," said Merlin, "is the sword I spoke of." As they watched, a mysterious woman appeared, floating upon the moonlit lake. "Who is that?" Arthur asked. "The Lady of the Lake," Merlin explained. "Within this lake is a rock, and upon that rock stands a palace where she dwells. She will come to you. Ask her courteously for the sword." The lady approached and greeted Arthur. He bowed respectfully and said, "Lady, I see an arm holding a sword above the water. I wish that sword were mine, for I have broken mine and need a blade to defend my kingdom." "Sir King," the lady replied, "that sword is mine. I will give it to you, or on condition, when I ask a gift of you in return, you will grant it. By my faith," Arthur said, "I will give you whatever you ask. Then row out to the sword and take it, along with its scabbard. When the time is right, I will ask my gift." Arthur and Merlin climbed into a small boat and rowed to where the hand held the sword. Arthur grasped the handle, and the moment he took it, the arm and hand silently withdrew beneath the water. They rowed back to shore, and Arthur examined his new blade with wonder. It was the most beautiful and perfectly balanced sword he'd ever held. "Which do you prefer?" Merlin asked. the sword or the scabbard?" "The sword, of course," Arthur replied. "You answer as a fool would," Merlin said seriously. "The scabbard is worth 10 of the sword. While you wear that scabbard, you shall lose no blood, no matter how gravely you're wounded. Keep it safe always." The sword was named Excalibur, and with it, Arthur would forge a legend.